Good evening. Today is August 16, 2021, and this is the 65th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. My guest today is my dear friend, Don Ulsch, who is also a advisory board member of the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement and the CEO of China 863 program. Don has been with us in the past. We have looked at China's influence in the region. He has advised the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, and also the U.S. Air Force regarding cybersecurity and analysis that involved in AI, and also at the same time machine learning, and was nominated by DHS to be their liaison to the Central Intelligence Agency. It is very important for us to take a look at what is happening with U.S. foreign policy currently. Don is here for us to look at the strategic outlay after Afghanistan. Before we begin, everybody knows what is happening within Afghanistan, but we want to begin with this short video. We wanted to start with a video that was done by Indian Press, and it's important because just today, a few hours ago, the reporter spoke about how Afghanistan is not of an interest to us. It is not a strategic interest to the United States. In his talk, he mentioned China and Russia only once in passing. India was never even mentioned. India being a strategic partner for us who's supposed to be a buffer against China on a strategic platform. In his discussion, he looked at specifically that we want to focus on no longer counterinsurgency, but to look at counterterrorism. The issue with that is, as you want to go ahead and focus on counterterrorism, there's new definitions that are being put out there by the Department of Homeland Security on what counterterrorism is. And counterterrorism, as of a bulletin that was put out on 13 August, is specifically looking at internal terrorism in the United States. And that is looking for individuals that are not from overseas, in this case, the Taliban or any other type of insurgency group out there that can conduct terrorist operations within the United States. This is what the 13th August bulletin from the National Terrorism Advisory System from the Department of Homeland Security says. And if that's what the focus is, then the president has defined a foreign policy as more of a national policy for the U.S. Now, I have worked on issues to try to be able to get us needed support when I was in the U.S. military by creating the Special Skills Initiative, which married up the Department of State folks and the DoD together for the first time. The whole process was to be able to have a much better working relationship between the two organizational structures. And prior to a deployment to Afghanistan, I was able to at least bring these two elements together, have them trained together at Fort Drum, New York, before my unit was deployed to Afghanistan. I did not make that deployment because I was asked to go to a diplomatic mission. So I was pulled out of that deployment, but I did plan the procedures for it. My hearts go out to the servicemen today that are hurting. I know that a dear friend of mine who was assigned to my unit at that time asked me if he thought it would be a good idea for him to be able to go at least to a left seat, right seat before the 10th Mountain deploying. I told him, I can give you my perspective on it, but I cannot advise you because it would be very difficult. We all knew the price of going down range. I did say that if you think about it, you need to go do your job, go to your left seat, right seat, come back, try not to go out in the wire. They're asking you for a short period of time to be there. And we'll take care of the family. We'll take care of your wife and kid. His son at that time was just 6 years old. He was adopted. Unfortunately, my friend did deploy to Afghanistan, and within the wire, he ended up being killed. And I remember that was the first time my family members, my parents actually had come to see me because my daughter was just a year old at that time, and we knew we were going on a diplomatic mission, and I may not have been able to come back to Chicago to see them prior to our deployment. And on the day they showed up, just the hour they showed up, I remember standing on my porch at Fort Drum, New York, looking at my son playing with my friend's son, fully knowing that he had been killed. But I had to wait, like everyone else, until the chaplain and also the commander for the unit showed up and broke the news to his wife. We have been soldiers in combat, and we've seen deaths. We have lost a lot of friends. But in that process, I will tell you, the video that you saw and how we exited out of Afghanistan, you're never going to have a good exit. But that was very poignant to the fact that no one within the current administration even bothered to look in the long run as to how to exit systematically out of the region. The special immigration visas, 80,000 were applied for, 10% had been processed. The reason it takes so long for individuals to apply for their visas is not because they think that there is going to be a hope change. We had interpreters on the ground to the last minute, and even now advising and supporting the Department of Defense guys that are on the ground and the Department of State folks. The fact that the Department of State did not take any opportunity to even create one memorandum of understanding with other nations to say that at least take a bunch of our folks now and house them in your locations that we're willing to pay for. The fact that even under COVID restrictions, where you have a lot of your boats out there, ships out there that are basically sitting on dry dock and are not having any travelers to travel with them, that we did not have one of those in the Indian Ocean to be able to use for our wants and desires. The fact that we did not have enough aircrafts on the ground to be able to pick up individuals in a timely manner, in a processed way, to be able to get them out to Diego Garcia is incredible. And the fact that you did not prior plan to this, in October of 2001, Donald Rumsfeld knew that we had to leave Afghanistan at some time. Administration after administration came knowing that we would have to leave Afghanistan at some time, but not the plan to be able to get one single memorandum of agreement, which is a one-page agreement, maybe double space of that, to be able to have with other countries, shows the feckless concept of how we conduct foreign policy. State Department will never take blame. Department of Defense, unfortunately, will never take blame. With that said, there's a lot of blame to be placed out there. There's multiple examples. Unfortunately, it doesn't help U.S. foreign policy in the long run. Why are these people escaping? It's very simple. The first people that actually went and met with the Taliban or individuals that are tied to terrorist organizations, as we know today, and we have seen the Taliban have already started cracking down. Of course they would have to, in order to be able to squeeze people. On January 6th here in the United States, some individuals entered the Capitol Hill. There was individuals even killed there on both sides. Since then, the U.S. government has squeezed whoever they can using every instrument of power. Even if you were there and you did not participate, but you were seen in any videos or pictures of being there, by going after their accounts, by going after their employers, if possible, trying to put them in jail. Yet, when we look at Afghanistan, we do not think that the Taliban, that in this picture, as you see, the first thing they did was meet with the leader of Hamas, who was just recently elected as of 1 August again. And the man was in exile for 2 years, a terrorist organization, that these individuals are going to crack down, or anyone. If you're going to do it here on individuals that for whatever circumstance ended up being at Capitol Hill on 6 January, how do you not think that the Taliban that you have fought against, that have killed American soldiers, are not going to turn around and squeeze Americans? Now, the president said Afghanistan is not in our national strategy. It's not important to us. Okay, it's not important to us. If it's not important to us, then why are you now agreeing with China and agreeing with Russia on their perspectives of how to approach Afghanistan? Taliban just met with Chinese leadership. China is now dedicating money to build the infrastructure of Afghanistan. Whose money are they going to dedicate there? It is not going to be China's money that they're going to dedicate. They're going to basically take money from the United States, funnel through our businesses to them, and they're going to rebuild Afghanistan for themselves. As I said on a couple of shows before, basically what you're doing, you're not only gave military transfer technology, which we left in Bagram Airport, to the Taliban, to the Iranians, but you're going to go ahead now and basically, through our businesses here, empower the Chinese to use U.S. taxpayer dollars to purchase the Taliban for their wants and desires. If the belief was that you were going to be able to use Islamists to be able to kill as many of the Chinese along the Belt and Road Initiative, that's one thing. But the fact that you run a State Department that cannot have one memorandum of understanding between other nations, knowing that you are going to have a humanitarian crisis once you leave Afghanistan, in itself says that you're not capable to think at that strategic level. It is unfortunate, but this is where we are. Don, I wanted to bring you in today to look at what's going to happen for us in the future within the region. Thank you for waiting patiently for me to kind of lay out my perspective on what happened in Afghanistan. But it is what it is now. There's no going back, and I don't think this administration is going to focus there. They're going to focus on internal terrorists, which might be individuals that could be regular Americans out there that may not agree with their concept of what good governance is.
Hello, Sargis. Clearly, the video was very distressing. It's a horrible time in the region, and when I look at what does it take to ensure a smooth transition of power? That's what China has called for, a smooth transition of power by the Taliban. But I think we're going to experience anything but a smooth transition. I think that's already been clearly demonstrated. A cooperative government in Kabul is definitely to China's advantage for the implementation and continuation of its Belt and Road program in Afghanistan. One of the key points here is not just Afghanistan, but its role in the region, and China's role in the region. And for example, the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is a $62 billion infrastructure initiative that involves everything from building roads to highways, traditional infrastructure, energy, electricity. It's a significant investment, and China wants to make sure that investment lays the foundation for work throughout the region. And so this is a very significant concern. And we never really thought about the administration, U.S. government, does not seem to have thought out the implications of a withdrawal from Afghanistan from the China perspective. And what does that mean when we pull out and China goes in? You talked about the memorandum of understanding, memorandum of agreement. There should have been that type of agreement with these nations to address the impact of withdrawal and how that creates a China opportunity. And it is a significant opportunity. So, if we look at, who are the beneficiaries here, China is clearly the beneficiary. And I'd like to point out on this slide how China is actually gaining access to the technologies that it needs. One example is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor development of telecommunications technology as part of the e-commerce satellite-based e-commerce strategy. It is biotechnology, which is part of China and Pakistan's effort in developing food and processing food and utilizing advanced technologies to do that, which would help to feed the region, but through China's control. So we have a number of concerns about China's investment in the region. For example, India. You mentioned India earlier. India, Pakistan, and Iran have been developing an agreement to allow for the ease of transportation through these countries. And now, how is that going to be impacted? Because China has moved warships into the Arabian Sea, clearly a threat to India. So, it's very distressing to see what's happening here, and knowing that China is going to take advantage of this. And if we could just move to the first of the slides. Would be the slide on.
Yeah. As we're going back to the first slide that was shown in your slide deck, I do want to emphasize something here is the fact that, the U.S. is leaving. Somebody else is going to pick up that vacuum. And in this case, it's China. If people think that we were going to use Islamists against China, you're mistaken, because we're not going to. We're not geared that way. Our intelligence systems to be that sophisticated. I told you they can't get a memorandum done. You think these people have thought through the process of maybe arming these Islamists and using them against China? They're not going to do it, because China controls a lot of our tech industry, as you know. Pakistan was the leadership in Pakistan. A majority of the people in their parliament are all tied to Chinese conglomerates that are developing Pakistan, Baluchistan, those areas. So they're making money off of them. They were purchased a long time ago. The issue you run into also is that the Taliban itself did not just manifest in Afghanistan. It was a relationship that was tied with the Pakistan intelligence that developed that capability. A lot of them came out of there. Even Al-Qaeda was tied to them and came out of that relationship. So this is an outsider coming in and claiming lay to what is probably the largest narco state there is, and who's going to come in and who's going to develop that and build those infrastructures that are needed for them is going to be the Chinese Communist Party for the benefit of China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Look, China has already reached an agreement, from what I understand, with the Taliban, and so China shares a border, a 47-mile border with Afghanistan, and it happens to be near the western region where the Uyghurs are located. So China had a lot of concern about Islamic jihadists actually moving into that western region of China and inciting insurrection by the Uyghurs. And so China wanted to prevent that from happening. So it negotiated an agreement with the Taliban that the Taliban would not harbor Islamic jihadists who were intending to strike in through that western region of China and incite the Uyghurs. So there is no way that the Taliban and China are not going to come to an economic agreement, because it benefits China and it benefits the Taliban. And it will not benefit Afghanistan, and it will not benefit the United States. But there is going to be, as you said, a continuing investment by China and now in Afghanistan. So they were quite happy to see the United States pull out, because the United States now is less of an influence in the region, and that leaves a vacuum that China is willing to fill. This vacuum is now going to be occupied by the Chinese Communist Party, and all of the things that the Chinese Communist Party does, it will fulfill in the region with less opposition and more Chinese influence. Now, part of the problem with the Islamic jihadists who wanted to go in and incite revolution within the Uyghurs in Western China is that the Uyghurs have become sort of a really a focal point and a focal point in the news media. It's gained a tremendous amount of attention, and so China has been trying to play that down. So China's domestic tranquility program has now been sort of blessed by the ability to keep the Islamic jihadists out of China, therefore keeping the lid on the Uyghurs and keeping news about that at a minimum. So China is the big winner all the way around on this.
No, it is. And the countries that lose are the ones that are in Southeast Asia, are dependent on us, and we're our allies. Guess who else has to pull out now because U.S. is pulling out? Korea is pulling out. Japan is pulling out. I know that years ago when we looked at attacks that took place against Japanese mining company capabilities, there were 3 major attacks, and we started peeling back the onion as to where the funding came for the support of those attacks by the Taliban. It was paid by the Chinese. This is open source, folks. You could go and Google search it yourself. And who did the Chinese pay the money to the Taliban to attack? The Japanese. And since the Japanese left, the Chinese company leadership came in and replaced them. Again, it goes back to this concept that we say it is not to our strategic interest to be in Afghanistan. Understood, you want to say that that's not the interest that we have as far as fighting counterinsurgency. But at a strategic level, when you pull out, you get rid of the Koreans, you get rid of the Japanese, you take money again from the United States that gets funneled by American businesses that have literally prostituted themselves to the Chinese Communist Party. That money is, the taxpayer monies go back. It's not just special interests or private business money. It's government monies that we supplement to these companies sometimes goes back directly in order to purchase the Taliban for the wants and needs of the Chinese Communist Party. And right now, Iran, which was bought to the tune of 400 billion US dollars that China gave them, is also being considered as being a permanent member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Russia is a permanent member of, which was initially created in order to counter NATO and also counter anything that we were doing economically within the region. So you want to pivot out of the Middle East, God bless you. But when you pivot and you allow China to come in and take over, if your idea is that China's not going to be able to control, China goes in and kills whoever that doesn't listen to them and uses your taxpayer money to buy their favors and actually builds in this case. It doesn't go out there and try to give contract companies to anybody. It literally builds things from grounds up. It doesn't have some of the pieces that we put in, but literally we say that we put those pieces in to ensure that there's much more of a broader understanding of how money is used. There's more transparency and who gets the contracts in the regions, but it's literally created in a way where we try to launder money through agency groups to be able to purchase the help we needed. And unfortunately, our agencies were so feckless that they were always going in and picking up the lowest hanging fruit to use for our benefit. So what we do, we give that money now to China, and China comes in and basically controls the entire region.
Look, the fact is, Sargis, we need a unified approach in dealing with China and China's investment globally. If you look at China's acquisition of a lot of stock in Japanese companies, we've talked before about how China has invested in the purchase of small equity positions in over 170 Japanese public companies, and they're doing that elsewhere in the world. So all of the technology that China is gaining access to, it uses to further its interests in countries like Pakistan and sub-Saharan Africa, and it will follow that this happens in Afghanistan too if the Taliban and China remain close. So this is a major problem. Now, what we've demonstrated in this withdrawal is that we don't have a unified approach with other countries when it comes to Afghanistan, and that is translatable into our relationship with other countries regarding China. So if we had our NATO allies, for example, in lockstep with us on Afghanistan, we could create that same model for dealing with China. But right now, it's pretty much every country on its own. We're acting independently and individually, and we're not solving the problem. We're creating a larger problem, while China sits back and says, "Hey, this works for us." Here's the point about what we do versus what China does. The Chinese Communist Party makes its decisions on the basis of policy outcome. So China will sit back. It will invest where it needs to. It will take advantage of opportunities that we present to it, i.e. Afghanistan. And they will make investments on the basis of what they believe the political outcome is going to be, regardless of the cost and the expenditures involved. So they will make sure that the money is there. Is there a certain risk in doing that? Yes. Maybe down the road, this is the Star Wars scenario as we had with the Soviet Union, where China spends itself into oblivion. Probably not likely, but I mean, that's a potential outcome. But in the interim, China is winning this war of acquiring technology, using that technology to go to underdeveloped regions of the world, applying that technology to economic solutions, and creating economic opportunity. That's a very, very attractive proposition to many countries that are trying to achieve a better place in this world. Now it's going to happen. If it happens in Afghanistan, it's going to happen with the cooperation of the Taliban and China. And there's nothing good about that for the United States.
No, there's nothing good. There were at least 3,000 to 6,000 foreign fighters that were in those numbers. If anything, if right now we're looking at almost 500,000, which are estimated individuals who are trying to escape the Taliban, to include another million numbers and refugees are going to be created from us withdrawing the way we withdrew. And guess where those individuals are going to end up? Those individuals are going to be sent through the borders. They're going to end up in Western countries. And in the case of Europe, as Michael Jan has said it on my show before, the pool's going to be Germany. So we're going to be taking those individuals and shoveling them there. Terrorism has become a money-making process now. People use it as a means and ways to be able to not only fight these backyard wars, as I had written years ago about it, without them having to be on the ground, but they use these individuals, these networks, to be able to conduct their operations. China's all over the Middle East. It is all over the region. Unfortunately, now that you have given Afghanistan to them, and they don't have to worry about it anymore because they could basically use, again, U.S. taxpayer money to buy off the Taliban for themselves, and then they could develop their narco drug state more than it had been done in the past to be able to sell that in South America in order to push it into the American streets, to include in Chicago. They kill our future generations as our young men and women are too busy taking drugs here and dying by the bushels in the United States. And they take that money and make it a profit to beat us in the long run strategically. What is our answer to them? Pulling out of Afghanistan the way we did, by saying that we're more interested in terrorism in itself rather than counterinsurgency. So counterterrorism, and as is defined, as I said earlier, by the Department of Homeland Security in their memorandum of 13 August, it is basically individuals that are Americans that may not agree with how the certain elements of our political system, what we call the far left, looks at how our kids should be educated and what our foreign policy needs to be. It is what it is, Don. What is your recommendation as to how we may be able to counter this? We could have done it easily. Look, within 12 hours, 18 hours, if the POTUS was serious about it, we could have killed a lot of these Taliban as they manifested themselves. We could have just killed their leadership. You could have easily blocked the borders between Pakistan and the U.S. using your agency elements. You could have sent your special forces in. We could have absolutely put use every technology at our disposal to destroy as many targets as possible. Even the 82nd that's been sent in could have been sitting in those mountain passes where they couldn't come back into them. It would have been a short term, no more than maybe 10 days to 20-day operation. You could have killed a lot of the leadership that finally came out of the shadows, and then you could have left. You don't have to do nation building. And at least at a minimum, you could have allowed your Air Force to still be supporting the Afghan military. Once I train you in a certain way, if I remove those elements that are supposed to be there to help you, I can't ask you to fight a different type of a fight or a different type of a war. When I let the Syrian military force structures in Iraq and Syria, and we did tier 1, tier 2 level operations, I was not going to put them in a conventional fight when the Kurds and the Arabs started looking at fighting each other after the Kurdish regional government declared independence. I took them off the battlefield because when I was asked, well, why don't you go back into the fight? I said, because that's not what I trained them on. Why would I put them in there and get them killed? Made no sense to me. But what we do with the Afghan force structures, we basically train them in a certain way. Then we removed our capabilities to support them by air. And we said, good luck as the Chinese come in with their money and their support mechanisms.
So it's kind of ironic. A lot of people have made the comparison about China's investment in Pakistan as being the equivalent of the Marshall Plan after World War II, which ironically was to stop communism, by the way. Look, we are not in, it's been stated clearly, we are not in the nation building business. However, we need to understand that China is in the nation building business, and that's how it is going to strengthen its geopolitical position globally. It's how it's going to increase its base of intelligence operations and military around the world. So, okay, so we don't want to be a nation building United States of America, but we need to realize that that China is. But you asked the question, what could we have done differently? Clearly, one thing is that we should have approached our allies and sat around the table and said, look, we don't want to be in the nation building business. China is in the nation building business. How is it that we can mitigate the risk of that? How is it that we can neutralize the China influence and the China impact in the region? What are some of the things that we could do? How is it that we can blunt the impact of China's relationship with the Taliban? Now, I'm surprised that we haven't been doing this all along, and we should have been doing it all along. And now there's more of a panic with clearly no definitive strategy for doing this. Now, in dealing with China, we're looking at our strategic future. How is it that China's position in nation building is going to slowly allow China to overtake us? There was just an article that came out the other day about China's already overtaking us in the development of artificial intelligence. They're doing that in organic ways by developing AI in China. They're doing it by relying on strategic alliances and joint ventures with companies around the world, and then applying that to countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. So how is it that we can build a wall between what China is doing in the acquisition of these technologies and then deploying these technologies in its nation-building efforts? That's one of the things that we should have been discussing. And one of the ways in which you could drive that conversation is to talk about limiting China's access to the technology that it is acquiring that is then applied to these countries, these developing nations. Now, that's something that we're not having much of a conversation on, quite frankly, and we're not doing much at the government level to have that conversation. But again, how do we mitigate China's influence as it acquires technology and deploys it in developing nations like Afghanistan, like Pakistan? What is it that we do? First of all, we have to start the conversation. I don't believe that conversation is taking place. It's a difficult conversation. I mean, if you look at countries like Germany, Germany has increasingly close ties technologically to China. But then again, so does South Korea. There is money to be made. There's money to be lost by engaging in these strategies. We got to figure out, where are we on the spectrum? What is it that we're willing to give up? What are our allies willing to give up, if anything? But we have to blunt the impact of China's global expansion. We have to blunt the impact of China's nation-building strategy, and we need to do it now. Pulling out of Afghanistan simply gives China another market. It gives China a reason to partner with the Taliban. It gives the Taliban negotiating strategy to deal with the Islamic jihadists that want to move and incite riots among the Uyghurs in Western China. So it's a very complicated situation, but there's no excuse for not having the conversation. There's no excuse for not pursuing a counter strategy that will impact China's growth in the region and elsewhere.
No, if I hear you well, it's not just an assumption. We do courses of action. One of the assumptions would be, well, China is able to control Afghanistan for its benefit. I think basically what you're saying, that everything has been laid out anyway in their long-term plan, that they are able to affect it, given the fact that they have done it using the technologies really that they've stolen from us, our intellectual technology. Unfortunately, we are not countering that. That's not what we're looking at. And I said the president just mentioned China and Russia in passing in his discussion. He didn't even look at them as being our enemies. And as he said, from his perspective, Afghanistan is not in our long-term strategy. But I think what you laid out is that it actually is. It is something that should have been looked at, and the approach should have been different. Now, I know that Afghanistan will take generations to change. It was starting to change. Unfortunately, I think what we have seen in Afghanistan may duplicate itself in Iraq again and other places. We don't learn from history, Don. When we were in South Vietnam, there was a multi-force structure in North Vietnam, and we knew it's possible that the North Vietnamese would go against the South Vietnamese. We pulled our air support from the South Vietnamese, and they got overran, and the rest is history. In Afghanistan, same thing. You had a force structure that was well supported, and when we left all our equipment there, we basically just had technology transferred to them, and we cut off the air support for the Afghan forces. If it was done on purpose, let's say it was a foreign policy to be done on purpose, is there any way that you think the U.S. systems are set up to be able to counter what China is going to bring to bear in Afghanistan, which is U.S. taxpayer dollars, and building these colossal projects, or at least initially build the infrastructure and allow this kind of a tech transfer to be able to basically unify that particular region faster than it would have taken, maybe possibly. And as Michael Young had said a couple of days ago, that a lot of people in Afghanistan just do not use those kind of access languages, but Chinese is an access language. And I know that China right now in northern Iraq is teaching Kurds Mandarin Chinese in their schools, and they'll probably be doing the same thing in Afghanistan soon. Is there anything that we have at least maybe ability for us to use internally in U.S. structures when it comes to what you understand with businesses, cybersecurity capabilities, that we can maybe counter China within Afghanistan and starts developing Afghanistan for its wants?
What's going to happen in Afghanistan, as long as China maintains its relationship with the Taliban, is that Afghanistan will be part of that 2035 plan by China for the implementation of satellite-based e-commerce. So, it's obviously it's still the dark ages in Afghanistan, but China will use this as an opportunity to bring technology to solve that problem. And the way it's going to do that, as it is in other developing nations, including in Africa, is to provide internet enabling technologies and services through satellites. It's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen the year after, but in the future, it will happen as part of China's evolution and applying these technologies to gain geopolitical and military prominence in have-not regions of the world. So there is a plan for doing that. So how is it that we can interfere with that plan, mitigate that risk? One of the things that we can do is look at it with our allies, because this is, again, it's an approach that must be undertaken not only by the U.S. but our allies. Is we have to realize that China cannot do this alone. China is dependent on our technology, the technology of our NATO partners of South Korea and Japan. It is acquiring all of these equity positions. We're letting this happen. We see a number of joint ventures in advanced technology development taking place with Russia, with Japan, in Poland, in Canada, in Europe, in the United States, in Silicon Valley, in New York City. We see these development programs in technology that are helping China narrow its technology innovation gap. So they're working on it domestically, and they're acquiring technologies from around the world, and they're doing it in a lot of different ways. And that is what we have got to neutralize. We have got to stop that from happening. And the only way that we can do this is through legislation. May not be the only way, but it's one of the key ways. We've got to make it painful for countries to sell technology and allow the acquisition of technologies by China. So we're doing it for a short-term profit, but we're contributing to China's long-term strategic gain and China's long-term prominence and their global economic supremacy. That's what this is leading to. So it's not just Afghanistan, it's not sub-Saharan Africa, it's developing nations around the world. And we have to look at Afghanistan and Pakistan within that framework of this developing nation status, and how China is going to bring them out of developing nation status using our technology and the technology of our allies. Yes, there are things that we can do. We need to look at each one of these developing countries. We need to look at what China's actions are, what their intent is. We need to understand how they're going to deploy these satellite-based internet services for e-commerce that will create wealth throughout the course of the years ahead in each one of these countries. Some will be successful, some will fail. But in general, that is China's strategy, and that is that's a danger to the United States and to our allies, because China wants to rule the world, and this is the way they're going to do it, by claiming rights to build these economies while we pull out of some of these economies or fail to help these countries maneuver around China and partner with the United States. And it's happening all over.
Well, I mean, China's resetting the battlefield, right? The old battlefields don't exist. You
Yes.
want to reset them. It's going to be a cyber battlefield, and we're not even ready to fight that fight. And they're using our technology to fight us and to reset the battlefield for themselves. And unfortunately, as you have said, and I've said it, they're using our U.S. taxpayer dollars that are laundered through Chinese companies to basically win the hearts and minds in Afghanistan of the government leadership. That's going to be brutal for them, and they're going to use it as a way to control Afghanistan. They're not going to send their folks in, but they're going to, point the finger at whoever is the Taliban leader that we're probably going to recognize through our State Departments, because that's what State Department does. They just recognize what country leadership is, regardless of they're good or bad, and they're going to use that individual to basically advance their agenda, at least along their Belt and the Road Initiative. Don, we're short on time. We'll bring you back again. Your blessing to the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. I know we were in Washington just, a month ago, and we had these discussions with the Senate staffers and also congressional staffers. And we told them, it's coming, but it is what it is. All we could do is let them know. And how they react to it is on them. They work on a different timeline, the politicians do, than the reality of how the enemy is, progressing forward on their timeline. With that said, if people want to get to know more about the work you do outside of the Near East, where can they go?
They can go to Ulsch, ULSCH, cyber.com. And my email address is don@ulschcyberadvisory.com.
Thank you again, Don. Any last words?
Yes, my last word is that I hope that we use this loss as a lesson learned, that it didn't have to end this way. China did not have to come in and fill this vacuum, and yet it is going to happen, and this should be the last time we let that happen. And that brings into this discussion the context of, do we let it happen in, let's say, Eastern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa? Because the same issues are at work. China's nation building is going to fortify China's economic strategy. And are we going to let that happen? And this is a perfect case in Afghanistan of how it happens. So when we abdicate responsibility in these areas, in these regions, China will come behind us and clean it up and take advantage of it. And if we're willing to let that happen as a nation, we have to be willing to pay the price of letting that happen. I don't think we should.
I don't think we should. My hope and desires is that China fails miserably in Afghanistan. But I doubt it, because I set the battlefield straight from going back to 2015 when I briefed in Japan, came back and wrote an article saying that, the Obama administration at that time fully endorsed China's vision on what the relationship between China and the U.S. should be on a global stage. Unfortunately, fast forward almost a decade later, and it seems that, we have gone ahead under the current administration and are still supporting China's vision as to what that relationship should be. But Reality is money talks, BS walks, and as long as Washington's willing to get bought off with dollars, and businessmen are willing to sell their technology for the cheapest, just be able to get a initial buyout of what they think it's advantageous for themselves rather than for the nation. It is what it is. This slide was put up by us today on the Near East Center, and I asked the question as far as who's going to occupy the center seat reserved for global influencer. And if you look on the left-hand side as you're looking at your TV or monitor, the first picture has the Tehran conference, which was led at that time by the United States, in the Soviet embassy in Iran, where Joseph Stalin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill had met to discuss how to defeat the Nazis. Just on 12 August 21, in commemoration of that meeting, the UK ambassador to Iran and also the Russian ambassador to Iran met at the same location, and the Russian embassy in Iran. And who was missing from that picture? It was the United States. The question asked, who's going to fill that chair? It seems the way we're going, it's probably going to be China. And I hope it's not going to be China. Unfortunately, I don't see how we're going to recover, especially with the disaster that took place in Afghanistan.
And remember that China will continue this pursuit as long as it believes that there is a political gain. They will continue to invest.
Thank you, Don. With that said, please, I ask my viewers to pray for all the family members, Gold Star spouses, widows, mothers, fathers, who had their sons and daughters die on the battlefields of Afghanistan. Today, keep them in your prayers. I do know that we're losing 22 soldiers a day, and those numbers are going to probably go higher than need be, because it's a rough time for those soldiers when they see that there was a political decision made where we decided that we're going to exit the global stage in order to focus on what the current leadership thinks is domestic terrorism. With that said,
Amen.
God bless you all. God bless you all and keep you all. There's new paradigms.
And as the US and India talk about Afghanistan, the Chinese are already making their first moves. Let me show you some images. These are images of Taliban delegates meeting China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to the Chinese media, a high-ranking delegation of the Taliban is currently in the Chinese city of Tianjin. The delegation will stay there for at least 2 days. It is being led by Mullah Abdul Baradar Akhund. This man heads the Taliban's political office in Qatar. He has also been the lead negotiator for talks with the US. And now he's leading the negotiations with China. What sort of negotiations? We'll tell you what China wants in a bit. First, let's understand what's in it for Taliban. What are they doing in China? For the Taliban, this visit means more legitimacy. It means more recognition globally as a legit player in Afghanistan and a return to the political mainstream. It also means more investments and financial support. Plus, the Taliban is said to be seeking assurances from China to help them establish an emirate in Afghanistan. Here's what Zhao Lijian said about the Taliban's expectations from Beijing.
The Afghan Taliban hopes for China's increased participation in the peace and reconstruction process in Afghanistan and can play an even bigger role in Afghanistan's future reconstruction and economic development.
You heard that. Increased participation in peace and reconstruction process. It seems like the Taliban have been reading up a lot on public relations and outreach lately. But what about China? What does Beijing want in return from this terror outfit? China wants to secure a favorable environment for its investments. It wants to expand the Belt and Road Initiative on Afghan soil. It wants to relaunch some blocked projects. China also wants to use Afghanistan as a route to Central Asia, to nations like Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. These are countries that China does not share borders with. Afghanistan will give it access. And above everything else, China hopes that engaging with the Taliban will mean fewer worries in Xinjiang. That with the Taliban on its side, it will be able to combat militancy in Xinjiang. In fact, the Chinese foreign minister has said this on record. He said that he hopes the Taliban would crack down on the East Turkestan Islamic movement. This is an insurgent group that wants to replace Xinjiang with an independent state called East Turkestan. Listen to this.
Wang Yi emphasized that the Turkestan Islamic Party is an international terrorist organization listed by the UN Security Council and poses a direct threat to China's national security and territorial integrity. Fighting against the East Turkestan Islamic movement is the common responsibility of the international community. We hope the Afghan Taliban can draw a clear line with all terrorist organizations, including the East Turkestan Islamic movement, and resolutely and effectively crack down on them. This is done to remove obstacles towards regional security and stability, as well as develop cooperation and play a positive role in creating favorable conditions.
Now here's the thing, the Taliban tends to go on extremes on religious matters. It has a history of supporting terror outfits beyond its sphere of operations. China clearly understands this threat. Making an enemy out of a terror outfit is not in Beijing's interest. But being friends with a terror state has not worked out in China's interest either. Take the case of Pakistan, where Chinese interests and Chinese citizens are both under attack. On the 14th of July, 9 Chinese nationals were killed in a bus explosion. We reported on it. Pakistan called it a mishap. China called it an attack. Now today, barely 2 weeks after this incident, a Chinese national was shot at and wounded in Karachi. According to the local police, 2 Chinese nationals were on their way to Karachi's industrial area. They were attacked by bike-borne assailants. Here's an eyewitness account.
I was resting in my vehicle. Suddenly a white Corolla car stopped and someone said, "Pull up your ambulance right now." When I got out of my ambulance, I saw that there were Chinese people in the car. One was severely injured. One was sitting beside him and the other was a driver. I shifted all the 3 to my ambulance and carried them to trauma center. On the way, the driver told me that the incident occurred under the bridge and that they had been fired on.
No one has claimed responsibility for this attack, but observers say it could be a fallout of the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan. It could be. As it is, anti-China sentiments are are on the rise, and attacks have also been on the rise in Pakistan for quite some time now. The Taliban's comeback may be fueling this animosity further. There's reason for China to be cautious here because the Taliban and Pakistan are like peas in a pod. They have a history of harvesting chaos, of triggering conflicts that take a life of their own and spread into several subgroups. Xinjiang could be the next on this list, and China understands this threat. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.